Rain lashed the courthouse steps, each drop exploding against cracked stone. Sirens wailed in the distance, their pitch slicing through the gray dawn as a sheriff's cruiser skidded to a halt. Deputies spilled out, boots splashing in puddles, their hands gripping a man's arms. Daniel Rigg, 66, his plain shirt soaked, jeans clinging to his legs. His wrists twisted behind him, cuffs snapping shut with a metallic clank that echoed louder than the storm. Camera flashes burst from the crowd, phones raised like weapons, capturing his face, eyes fixed forward, jaw set, silent under the weight of a dozen gazes. The courthouse doors groaned open, and the deputies shoved Rigg inside. Water dripped from his boots, pooling on the tile floor, each step a muted slap. Reporters jostled in the hallway, their murmurs rising like static. "That's the guy. Threatened some kid. Ex-Marine, right?" A woman in a red coat whispered, "Looks like he's done this before." Rigg's escort didn't slow, guiding him past a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed overhead, casting jagged shadows on the walls. His boots left wet streaks, the only trace of his passage. In courtroom 3, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of polished wood and old coffee. The judge's bench loomed high, its gavels lined like sentinels. Spectators packed the pews, locals in flannel, a few veterans in faded caps, and reporters scribbling in notepads. The jury box sat half full, jurors shifting in their seats, one adjusting her glasses, another tapping a pen. The prosecutor, suit crisp, leaned back in his chair, flipping through a file labeled Daniel Rigg. The public defender, hair pulled tight, typed on a laptop, her eyes never lifting to her client. Rigg stood at the defense table, cuffs glinting under the chandelier's dim glow. His hands hung loose, fingers still, as if the chains were weightless. The bailiff's radio crackled and a deputy muttered, "Quiet one, huh?" No one answered. Outside, thunder rumbled, shaking the windows, and the crowd's whispers grew sharper. A man in the gallery leaned forward, his voice low. "Heard he said he could kill from half a mile away." A woman nodded, clutching her purse. The judge entered, robes swishing, and the room stood. Her gavels tapped once, a sharp crack silencing the chatter. She sat, glasses catching the light, and scanned the room. "Be seated." Her voice was clipped, final. The spectators obeyed, chairs creaking. Rigg remained standing, his boots planted, water still dripping from his hem. The prosecutor rose, smoothing his tie, and stepped forward. "Your Honor, the state charges Daniel Rigg with assault and terroristic threats, stemming from an altercation at Harper's gas station on March 12th. A screen flickered on the wall, displaying grainy security footage. The gas station's neon sign buzzed, its light pooling on wet asphalt. Rigg's figure moved in the frame, slow, deliberate, facing a younger man in a hoodie. The younger man gestured wildly, his mouth open, while Rigg stood still, hands at his sides. The footage cut off. The prosecutor turned to the jury. This man intimidated a civilian, claiming he could end him from 800 yards. A clear threat, rooted in his military past. The jury stirred. One juror, a man with a buzz cut, crossed his arms. Another, a woman in a floral dress, scribbled in a notebook. The public defender didn't look up, her fingers pausing over her keyboard. Rigg's eyes stayed on the screen, unblinking as if the footage held no meaning. The prosecutor continued, his voice rising. "He lives alone, no family, no ties. A man who thinks his service gives him a pass to menace." Outside, the rain slowed, but the wind howled, rattling the courtroom's windows. A reporter in the back row typed furiously, her phone glowing. The veterans in the gallery shifted, one adjusting his cap, his jaw tight. The bailiff stood near Rigg, hand on his belt, watching the crowd. The judge's pen scratched against paper, her gaze flicking to Rigg, then away. The prosecutor stepped closer to the jury, holding up a photograph. A close-up of Riggs' face from the gas station, his eyes shadowed, mouth a flat line. This is not a hero. This is a man who's forgotten where the battlefield ends. He let the photo linger, then dropped it on the table with a soft thud. The room was silent, save for the hum of the heater and the distant drip of rain through a leak in the ceiling. Riggs' boots shifted, a faint scrape against the floor. He lifted his head, not to the jury, not to the judge, but to the double doors at the back of the room. They swung open, and a man stepped through, a general, his uniform crisp, 4 silver stars gleaming on his collar. The crowd gasped, cameras swiveled, and the judge's gavels slipped from her hand, clattering to the desk. The general's boots echoed, each step deliberate, his eyes locked on Riggs. The general's boots struck the courtroom floor, each step a measured thud that silenced the crowd's murmurs. His uniform, pressed sharp, caught the chandelier's light, 4 silver stars flashing like beacons on his collar. Daniel Riggs stood at the defense table, cuffs glinting, his eyes meeting the general's, steady, unyielding, silent. The judge froze, her hand still hovering over the fallen gavel, its clatter echoing in the wood-paneled chamber. Reporters twisted in their seats, cameras clicking, lenses trained on the newcomer. A juror dropped her pen, the plastic snapping against the floor. General Samuel Wyatt paused mid-aisle, his shadow stretching across the tile, grazing Riggs' boots. The prosecutor, tie askew, stepped back, his file slipping to the table with a soft flap. The public defender's laptop screen dimmed, her fingers stilled. Outside, rain drummed the courthouse roof, a low roar that seeped through the walls, mingling with the hum of a flickering exit sign. The veterans in the gallery leaned forward, one gripping the pew's edge, his knuckles white. Wyatt moved again, his stride unbroken, closing the distance to the defense table. The bailiff shifted, hand brushing his radio, but made no move to intercept. The general stopped 3 feet from Riggs, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid. His voice cut through the room, low and clear. "I'm here for Daniel Riggs." The words hung, unshaken by the crowd's sharp inhale. The judge blinked, adjusting her glasses. "General, this is a closed proceeding. State your purpose." Wyatt's eyes never left Riggs. "This man saved my life. I'm here to make sure this court knows who he is." The room stirred, whispers, creaking chairs, a phone buzzing in a reporter's bag. The prosecutor cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Your Honor, this is irregular. The state's case is already presented." The judge raised a hand, silencing him, her gaze locked on Wyatt. "Proceed, General. Briefly." The general turned to the jury, his boots pivoting with a faint squeak. The jurors sat rigid, one clutching a notepad, another wiping sweat from his brow. Wyatt's voice carried, deliberate, each word landing like a stone. 31 years ago, Fallujah. My unit was pinned, surrounded, 2 men bleeding out. No comms, no extraction. A sniper opened a path. 12 kills, 5 minutes. Last shot, 936 yards, moving target, crosswind. That sniper was Daniel Riggs. The courtroom exhaled, a collective gasp. A reporter's pen scratched furiously, another's camera zoomed, its lens whirring. The veterans in the gallery nodded, one adjusting his cap, eyes glistening. Riggs stood motionless, his cuffs reflecting the overhead light, his boots rooted to the floor. The prosecutor shuffled papers, his jaw tight, while the public defender glanced at Riggs, then away, her laptop forgotten. Wyatt stepped closer to the jury box, his shadow falling over the front row. He didn't ask for medals, didn't wait for thanks. He vanished into the dust, and I didn't see him again until today. He paused, turning to Riggs, his hand rising to his chest, fingers brushing the stars on his collar. This man doesn't speak because he doesn't need to. His actions already have. The judge's pen tapped once, a sharp click against her desk. General, are you submitting testimony? Wyatt nodded, his eyes still on Rigg. I am, and I request to address the jury directly. The prosecutor stood, voice rising. Objection, Your Honor. This is unvetted, irrelevant to the charges. The judge's gaze flicked to Rigg, then Wyatt, then the jury. Overruled. General, you have 5 minutes. Wyatt faced the jury, his hands unclasping, one gesturing toward Rigg. You've heard he's a threat. A man who lives alone, wears old boots, says little. You've heard he scared someone at a gas station, but you haven't heard this. The man in cuffs has carried silence heavier than any of you will ever know. He's not here to intimidate. He's here because the world forgot what restraint looks like. The jury shifted, a woman in a cardigan leaning forward, her glasses slipping. A man with a buzz cut uncrossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. Outside, thunder cracked, the windows rattling, rain streaking the glass in jagged lines. The bailiff's radio crackled again, a voice muttering about a crowd gathering outside. Reporters typed, their screens glowing, one whispering to another, "This is going viral." Rigg's hands twitched, the cuffs clinking faintly. His eyes dropped to the floor, then lifted to Wyatt, holding there, unreadable. The general continued, his voice steady. I read the charges. A man claims Rigg threatened him. Said he could end him from 800 yards. Maybe he said it. Maybe he didn't. But if Daniel Rigg wanted to harm someone, you wouldn't be here debating it. You'd be burying him. The room fell silent, save for the rain's relentless patter and the faint drip of a leak in the corner. The prosecutor's face reddened, his fingers gripping the table. The public defender's laptop snapped shut, the sound sharp in the stillness. The veterans in the gallery sat taller, one saluting Rigg with a slow nod. The judge's pen stopped, her hand resting on the desk, her eyes on Wyatt. Wyatt turned to Rigg, his boots scuffing the tile. He lowered his voice, but it carried. I'm not here because he asked. I'm here because I owe him, and because this court deserves to know the truth. He stepped back, facing the judge. I'm done, Your Honor. The judge nodded, her gavels untouched. The court will recess for 10 minutes. Her voice wavered, barely audible over the crowd's rising murmurs. The bailiff moved to Rigg, keys jangling, but paused as the general raised a hand. Wyatt leaned toward Rigg, his whisper inaudible, his hand brushing Rigg's shoulder. Rigg's eyes flicked to the general, then away, his boots shifting. The double doors burst open, a rush of wind and rain sweeping in. A news van's lights flashed outside, red and blue strobing through the windows, illuminating a crowd swelling in the parking lot. Veterans, locals, cameras raised. A man in a wheelchair, medals pinned to his jacket, rolled forward, his voice booming. We're here for Rigg! The courtroom erupted, chairs scraping, voices colliding as the judge's gavel slammed, its echo drowned by the chaos. The gavel's crack cut through the courtroom, but the chaos surged louder, voices overlapping, chairs scraping, camera shutters snapping like gunfire. Rain battered the windows, sheets of water distorting the red and blue strobes flashing from news vans outside. Daniel Rigg stood at the defense table, cuffs glinting under the flickering chandelier, his boots planted, eyes fixed on the open double doors. The man in the wheelchair, medals gleaming on his jacket, rolled forward, his fists pounding the armrests. We're here for Rigg, he bellowed again, his voice raw, carrying over the crowd's rising shouts. Deputies pushed into the doorway, their boots slipping on wet tile, hands raised to block the swelling mass. Veterans in faded caps, locals clutching phones, reporters shoving microphones forward. A woman in a yellow raincoat stumbled, her camera clattering to the floor. The judge stood, robes billowing, her gavels raised like a weapon. Order! This court is in recess. Her voice strained, nearly lost in the din. The bailiff grabbed his radio, barking, "We need backup, now!" Riggs' hands twitched, the cuff's chain clinking faintly. His gaze shifted from the doors to the man in the wheelchair, then back, his jaw tight but silent. General Wyatt stood beside him, his uniform crisp, 4 stars catching the light. He turned to the judge, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, let them in. They're not here to disrupt." The judge's eyes narrowed, her knuckles white around the gavel. She nodded once, sharp, and the deputy stepped aside. The crowd poured through, boots and sneakers squeaking on the tile, their shadows merging under the buzzing fluorescence. The man in the wheelchair led, his wheels leaving wet tracks, followed by a veteran with a gray beard, a limp in his step, and another in a leather jacket, dog tags dangling. A reporter tripped, her notepad skidding across the floor, while another hoisted a camera, its red light blinking. The air thickened with the scent of wet clothes and coffee breath. The veterans fanned out along the back wall, standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces weathered, eyes locked on Rigg. The man in the wheelchair stopped near the defense table, his medals clinking as he leaned forward. "We served with him," he said, voice gravelly, pointing at Rigg. "He's no threat." The crowd hushed, heads turning. A juror, clutching her purse, stared wide-eyed. The prosecutor, suit rumpled, stepped back, his file forgotten on the table. The judge sat, her gavels lowered, her glasses slipping down her nose. "This is not a rally. Identify yourself." The man in the wheelchair straightened, his hands gripping the armrests. "Sergeant Major Thomas Hale, retired. 3rd Battalion, Fallujah, 94. Rigg saved my squad. Took out a nest at 700 yards, night scope, no moonlight." His voice cracked, but his eyes held steady. The gallery murmured, phones raised, capturing every word. Wyatt nodded, stepping beside Hale, his boots echoing. "These men aren't here for spectacle. They're here for truth." He gestured to the veterans, their caps tilted, jackets patched. "Each one knows Rigg's record. Each one owes him." The limping veteran spoke next, his voice low, deliberate. "Captain John Reese, retired. Rigg carried me 2 miles, shrapnel in my leg, Basra, 91. Never said a word. Just did it." The courtroom stilled, save for the rain's relentless drumming and the faint hum of a news van's generator outside. The public defender's laptop glowed, her hands idle, her eyes darting to Rigg. The prosecutor opened his mouth, then closed it, his tie askew. A juror, a man with a buzz cut, leaned forward, his pen rolling off the table, unnoticed. Rigg's boots shifted, a faint scrape, his cuffs catching the light as his hands hung loose. Hale rolled closer, his wheelchair creaking, his medals swaying. "You're judging a man you don't know," he said to the jury, his voice rising. "You see cuffs, old boots, silence. We see the guy who didn't flinch when bullets flew." He pointed to a scar on his neck, puckered and pale. "This is what happens without men like Rigg." The woman in the floral dress gasped, her notebook slipping. The judge's pen scratched, her gaze flicking to the jury, then Rigg. Outside, the crowd grew, their chants muffled by the storm. "Free Rigg! Free Rigg!" Flashbulbs popped, their light slicing through the rain-streaked windows, casting jagged patterns on the walls. A deputy barred the doors, his radio crackling with static. The veterans in the gallery stood taller, one saluting Rigg, his hand trembling. The reporter in the back row typed, her screen glowing, whispering, "This is bigger than we thought." The judge raised her hand, silencing the room. "This testimony is noted. The court will reconvene in 1 hour." Her gavels tapped, softer this time, her eyes lingering on Rigg. The bailiff moved to Rigg, keys jangling, but Wyatt raised a hand, stopping him. Let him sit. The bailiff hesitated, then stepped back. Rigg lowered himself into the chair, his cuffs clinking, his eyes on the floor, then lifting to Hale, then Wyatt. The crowd didn't move, their boots rooted, their breaths heavy. The veterans formed a half-circle behind Rigg, their shadows merging with his. The prosecutor gathered his papers, his hands shaking, while the public defender whispered to herself, her pen scribbling. The jury filed out, their footsteps uneven, one juror glancing back at Rigg, her glasses fogging. The doors swung open again, and a gust of wind carried in a crumpled photograph skidding across the tile. It landed near Rigg's boots, a faded image of a younger Rigg, in uniform, kneeling in desert sand, a rifle across his back. Hale leaned down, his wheelchair creaking, and picked it up, his fingers tracing the edges. He held it high, his voice booming. "This is who you're judging!" The crowd roared, fists raised, as the photograph trembled in his hand, rain streaking the windows like tears. The photograph quivered in Sergeant Major Hale's hand, its edges curling, rain-smeared ink blurring the image of a younger Daniel Rigg kneeling in desert sand. The courtroom's roar faded, swallowed by the storm's howl outside, wind rattling the windows, flinging water against glass. Rigg sat at the defense table, cuffs glinting, his boots still, eyes locked on the photograph. His plain shirt clung to his shoulders, damp from the morning's arrest, his hands resting loose, the chain between his wrists slack. The veterans behind him stood rigid, their shadows pooling on the tile, caps tilted, dog tags glinting. Hale's wheelchair creaked as he lowered the photograph, his metals clinking, his scar stark under the chandelier's flicker. "This is him," he said, voice low, thrusting the image toward the jury's empty box. The seats sat vacant, jurors still in recess, but the crowd's eyes followed. Reporters, locals, deputies, their breaths held. A camera flashed, its light bouncing off the wood-paneled walls, catching Rigg's face, jaw set, gaze distant, silent. The judge stood, robes rustling, her gavel gripped tight. "Sergeant Major, this is not evidence." Her voice was sharp, but her eyes flicked to the photograph, then Rigg, then away. Hale's jaw tightened, his hand steady. "It's truth, Your Honor. More than that file." He nodded to the prosecutor's table, where papers lay scattered, a pen rolling to the floor. The prosecutor, tie loose, stood frozen, his hands fumbling with a phone, its screen dark. General Wyatt stepped forward, his boots echoing, 4 stars gleaming on his collar. "Your Honor, this image corroborates our testimony. It's Rigg Fallujah, 94, the man who saved lives." He gestured to the veterans, Reese with his limp, Hale in his chair, others with weathered faces. "We're not here to disrupt, we're here to correct." The judge's glasses slipped, her fingers adjusting them, her gavel tapping once, a muted click. "Noted, but procedure stands. Return that to the clerk." Hale hesitated, his eyes on Rigg, then rolled to the clerk's desk, the photograph slapping the wood. The clerk, a young woman in a gray blazer, flinched, her pen skittering. She slid the image into a folder, her hands trembling, eyes darting to Rigg. Outside, the crowd's chants grew louder, "Free Rigg! Free Rigg!" Their fists pounding news vans, headlights slicing through the rain. A deputy barred the doors, his radio crackling. "Crowd's at 50, maybe more." The public defender stood, her laptop shut, her voice unsteady. "Your Honor, in light of new witnesses, I request a delay to confer with my client." The judge's eyes narrowed, her gavel hovering. "Denied. We reconvene in 40 minutes. Clear the gallery." The bailiff moved, keys jangling, but the veterans didn't budge. Reese, the limping captain, crossed his arms, his dog tags swaying. "We stay for Rigg." The crowd murmured, phones raised, recording. Rigg's boots scraped the tile, a faint sound as he rose, cuffs clinking. His eyes met Hale's, then Wyatt's, then dropped to the floor. He sat again, hands on the table, fingers still, water dripping from his hem, pooling beneath his chair. The chandelier buzzed, its light flickering, casting jagged shadows across his face. A reporter whispered, "He hasn't said a word," her phone glowing, live streaming to thousands. The judge's gavel slammed, its crack splitting the air. "Clear the room!" Deputies moved, boots stomping, pushing the crowd toward the doors. Reporters resisted, cameras hoisted, one shouting, "General, is Rigg a hero?" Wyatt didn't answer, his eyes on Rigg. The veterans shuffled out, Hale's wheelchair creaking, Reese's limp slowing him. The man in the leather jacket paused, saluting Rigg, his hand steady despite the deputy's nudge. The doors groaned shut, muffling the crowd's chants, leaving the courtroom hollow. Rain pounded the roof, a steady roar, the leak in the corner dripping faster, its plink echoing. The prosecutor gathered his papers, his hands shaking, muttering to himself. The public defender sat, her pen scratching aimlessly, her eyes avoiding Rigg. The bailiff stood near the defense table, his radio silent, his hand on his belt. Wyatt remained, his boots rooted, facing Rigg. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper, inaudible to the room. Rigg's eyes lifted, holding Wyatt's, then flicked to the clerk's desk, where the photograph lay in its folder. His cuffs shifted, a soft clink, his fingers curling slightly, then relaxing. The judge stood, her robes swishing, and exited through a side door, her footsteps fading. The bailiff gestured to Rigg, keys in hand. "Back to holding." Rigg rose, his boots deliberate, each step a muted thud. The chandelier flickered again, plunging the room into shadow for a moment, then flaring bright. Outside, a news van's horn blared, answered by the crowd's roar, their voices piercing the walls. "Let him go!" A flash of lightning lit the windows, thunder cracking seconds later, shaking the floor. The bailiff led Rigg toward a side door, but Wyatt stepped in front, his hand raised. "One moment." The bailiff paused, keys dangling, his eyes flicking to the general's stars. Wyatt faced Rigg, his hand brushing his own collar, then dropping. "They'll hear you now," he said, voice low, clear. Rigg's eyes held his, unblinking, then shifted to the doors where shadows moved beyond the frosted glass. More veterans arriving, their silhouettes sharp against the strobing lights. The side door opened, its hinges creaking, and the bailiff nudged Rigg forward. As he stepped through, a gust of wind swept the clerk's desk, scattering papers. The photograph slipped free, fluttering to the floor, landing face up, Rigg in the desert, rifle steady, eyes hidden by shadow. The clerk gasped, scrambling to retrieve it, but a deputy's boot pinned it, the image crumpling under his heel. The door slammed shut behind Rigg, its bang echoing as the crowd's chants outside swelled into a deafening crescendo. The holding cell door clanged shut, its metallic boom reverberating off concrete walls. Daniel Rigg stood in the center, cuffs still tight, his boots scuffing the gritty floor, leaving faint streaks of rainwater. The cell was small, barely 10 feet square, lit by a single bulb caged in wire, its light harsh, casting stark shadows across Rigg's plain shirt and jeans. His hands hung loose, the chain between his wrists swaying slightly, glinting in the dim glow. Outside, the storm raged, rain hammering the courthouse's roof, muffled but relentless, a low roar seeping through the walls. A narrow bench bolted to the wall sat empty, its surface scratched with faded initials. Rigg didn't move toward it. His eyes traced the room, cracked paint, a rusted drain in the corner, a barred window high above, rain streaking the glass. His boots shifted, a soft scrape, and he faced the door, its steel surface scarred, a small grate at eye level revealing nothing but shadows in the hallway. The air smelled of damp concrete and stale sweat, thick, unmoving. Footsteps echoed beyond the door, heavy and uneven, accompanied by the jangle of keys. The grate slid open with a screech, and the bailiff's face appeared, his eyes scanning Riggs. "Sit tight," he said, voice flat, then slammed the grate shut. The footsteps faded, replaced by the distant hum of voices, reporters, deputies, the crowd's chants piercing the storm. "Free Rig! Free Rig!" A flash of lightning lit the window, thunder rattling the bars seconds later, the bulb flickering but holding. Riggs' cuffs clinked as he stepped closer to the wall, his fingers brushing the concrete, tracing a crack that ran like a vein. His boots stopped, rooted, his eyes lifting to the window, where rain blurred the world outside into smears of red and blue. News vans' lights strobing, relentless. The photograph from the courtroom, crumpled under a deputy's heel, lingered in the air, unseen but heavy. Rig in the desert, rifle steady, a ghost of a war no one in the courthouse had fought. The door's lock rattled and it swung open, hinges groaning. General Wyatt stood in the frame, his uniform crisp despite the rain, 4 stars gleaming under the bulb's glare. The bailiff hovered behind, keys in hand, his radio crackling with static. Wyatt's boots crossed the threshold, each step deliberate, his shadow falling across Riggs' face. "They're reconvening," Wyatt said, voice low, steady. "The judge wants you back." Riggs' eyes met Wyatt's, unblinking, then dropped to the general's collar, the stars catching the light. His cuffs shifted, a faint clink, his hands still. The bailiff stepped forward, gesturing to the hallway. "Let's move." Riggs didn't respond, his boots scraping as he turned, following Wyatt out. The cell door slammed behind, its echo sharp, swallowed by the storm's roar. The hallway was narrow, its tiles slick with tracked-in rain, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Reporters' voices leaked through the walls, their questions overlapping. "General, is Rig a hero? What's the judge deciding?" Deputies lined the corridor, their hands on belts, eyes tracking Riggs' slow steps. His wet shirt clung to his shoulders, water dripping from his hem, pooling in his wake. Wyatt walked beside him, his boots in sync, his hands clasped behind his back. A side door creaked open, and Sergeant Major Hale rolled through, his wheelchair's wheels squeaking, metals glinting on his jacket. "They're listening now," Hale said, his scar stark under the lights, his eyes on Rig. The jury's rattled. Riggs' gaze flicked to Hale, then away, his boots steady, cuffs swaying. The crowd's chants grew louder, vibrating the walls, words indistinct but fierce. A reporter darted past a deputy, her phone raised, but the bailiff blocked her, his arm outstretched. The courtroom doors loomed ahead, their frosted glass glowing with camera flashes from within. Wyatt paused, his hand brushing Riggs' shoulder, his voice a whisper. "You don't have to speak. They'll see." Riggs' eyes held Wyatt's, then shifted to the doors where shadows moved, jurors returning, spectators pressing closer. His boots stopped, a faint thud, his hands curling slightly, then relaxing. The doors swung open, and the courtroom's noise hit like a wave, chairs creaking, whispers rising, cameras clicking. The judge sat at the bench, her gavel raised, her glasses catching the chandelier's flicker. The jury filed in, their faces taut, one juror clutching a notepad, another wiping sweat from his brow. The prosecutor stood, his suit rumpled, papers clutched tight, while the public defender scribbled, her pen shaking. Riggs stepped inside, his boots echoing, cuffs glinting as deputies flanked him. The veterans lined the back wall, their caps tilted, dog tags swaying, eyes locked on him. Hale rolled to the gallery's edge, his wheelchair creaking, his hands gripping the armrests. Wyatt took a seat beside him, his uniform stark against the crowd's flannel and raincoats. The crowd hushed, phones raised, their screens glowing. The judge's gavel tapped, a sharp crack. Court is back in session. Her voice was firm, but her eyes lingered on Rigg, then Wyatt, then the jury. Given new testimony, the defense may present additional witnesses. The public defender stood, her voice halting. We call Sergeant Major Thomas Hale. The prosecutor's head snapped up, his pen dropping, rolling across the table. Hale rolled forward, his metals clinking, his scar catching the light. He stopped before the jury, his wheelchair's wheels locking with a click. His voice boomed, steady, raw. Rigg saved my squad, Fallujah, 94, sniper nest, 700 yards, pitch black. He didn't hesitate. Didn't miss. He pointed to his scar, his hand steady. This is what happens when he's not there. The jury leaned forward, a woman in a cardigan gasping, her glasses slipping. The prosecutor shifted, his papers crumpling in his grip. Outside, lightning flashed, thunder shaking the windows, rain streaking the glass. The crowd's chants surged, their fists pounding the doors, their voices breaking through. Justice for Rigg! A deputy barred the entrance, his radio crackling, but the doors rattled, hinges groaning under the pressure. Hale turned to Rigg, his eyes fierce, and raised a fist, metals glinting. The veterans echoed the gesture, their fists rising, dog tags clinking. Rigg's cuffs clinked as his hands twitched, his eyes on Hale, then the jury, then the doors, where a new figure pushed through, a woman, her coat soaked, clutching a faded letter, her hands trembling as she shouted, I know him too! The courtroom doors burst open, the woman's shout slicing through the crowd's chants. I know him too! Her rain-soaked coat dripped onto the tile, the faded letter in her hands trembling, its edges frayed, ink smudged. Daniel Rigg stood at the defense table, cuffs glinting under the chandelier's erratic flicker, his boots rooted, eyes locking on the letter. His plain shirt clung to his frame, water pooling beneath him, his hands still, the chain between his wrists slack. Outside, the storm roared, rain lashing the windows, thunder rattling the glass, red and blue strobes from news vans pulsing through the deluge. The woman pushed forward, her sneakers squeaking, hair plastered to her face. Deputies moved to intercept, their boots stomping, but General Wyatt raised a hand, his 4 stars catching the light. Let her through. His voice was calm, absolute. The deputies hesitated, then stepped back, their radios crackling. The judge's gavel hovered, her glasses slipping, her voice sharp. Identify yourself. The woman stopped, clutching the letter, her knuckles white. Margaret Cole, Your Honor. I was his neighbor. The crowd hushed, chairs creaking, cameras swiveling, their lenses whirring. Sergeant Major Hale, in his wheelchair, metals clinking, rolled closer, his scar stark under the fluorescence. The veterans along the back wall leaned forward, dog tags swaying, eyes on the letter. Rigg's gaze held steady, unblinking, his boots unmoving, cuffs reflecting the light. The prosecutor, suit crumpled, stood, his voice rising. Your Honor, this is irrelevant, unverified. The judge's gavel tapped, silencing him. Speak, Ms. Cole. Margaret's hands shook, the letter rustling as she unfolded it. Her voice wavered, then steadied. This came to my house by mistake years ago. It's addressed to Daniel Rigg from a colonel, 95. I kept it, meant to give it back, but he never talked. She held the letter higher, its paper yellowed, creased. It's about Fallujah. Says he saved a platoon, took a shot nobody else could. The courtroom stirred, whispers rising, a juror's pen clattering to the floor. The judge leaned forward, her robes rustling. Hand it to the clerk. Margaret stepped to the clerk's desk, her sneakers leaving wet prints, the letter slapping the wood. The clerk, glasses fogging, slid it into a folder, her hands trembling. The public defender stood, her voice halting. Your Honor, we request this be entered as evidence. The prosecutor's face reddened, his papers scattering as he gestured. Objection, this is hearsay, unauthenticated. The judge's gavel cracked, sharp. Overruled. The letter will be reviewed. Outside, the crowd's chants swelled. Justice for Rigg. Their fists pounding news vans, headlights slicing through the rain. A deputy barred the doors, his radio buzzing. Crowds past 70. Getting rough. The veterans in the gallery stood taller, one adjusting his cap, his jaw tight. Hale's wheelchair creaked, his fist still raised, metals glinting. Wyatt sat beside him, his boots crossed, his eyes on Rigg, then the letter. Rigg's cuffs clinked as his hands shifted, his fingers curling slightly, then relaxing. His eyes flicked to Margaret, then the clerk's desk where the letter lay, its words unseen but heavy. The chandelier buzzed, plunging the room into shadow for a moment, then flaring bright. A reporter typed furiously, her phone glowing, whispering, "This changes everything." Another hoisted a camera, its red light blinking, streaming to thousands. Margaret stepped back, her coat dripping, her eyes on Rigg. "He never told anyone," she said, voice breaking. "Lived alone, walked at dawn, fixed my fence once, never asked for thanks." She pointed to Rigg, her hand trembling. "You're judging a man who doesn't speak, but he's done more than you know." The jury leaned forward, a woman in a cardigan wiping her glasses, a man with a buzz cut nodding slowly. The judge's pen scratched, her gaze flicking to Rigg, then the letter. "Ms. Cole, take a seat." Margaret shuffled to the gallery, her sneakers squeaking, sitting beside a veteran who nodded, his dog tags clinking. The public defender scribbled, her pen shaking, while the prosecutor muttered, his papers crumpling in his grip. The bailiff stood near Rigg, his hand on his belt, eyes darting to the doors, where shadows pressed against the frosted glass. Hale spoke, his voice raw, booming. "That letter's just one piece. There's more. Medals he never claimed, men he carried, shots he took." He pointed to his scar, his hand steady. "This is what happens when he's not there." The veterans echoed, their fists rising, dog tags swaying. The crowd outside roared, their chants shaking the walls, a news van's horn blaring in response. Lightning flashed, thunder cracking, the windows rattling. The judge's gavel tapped, softer now. "The court will recess for 30 minutes to review this document." Her voice wavered, her eyes on the clerk's folder. The bailiff moved to Rigg, keys jangling, but Wyatt stood, his boots echoing. "Let him stay." The bailiff paused, then nodded, stepping back. Rigg sat, his cuffs clinking, his eyes on the floor, then lifting to the doors, where the crowd's shadows grew darker, their voices louder. The jury filed out, their footsteps uneven, one juror glancing back at Rigg, her notepad clutched tight. The veterans remained, their boots rooted, their eyes fierce. The prosecutor gathered his papers, his hands shaking, while the public defender whispered to herself, her pen scribbling. The chandelier flickered again, casting jagged shadows across Rigg's face, his boots still, water dripping from his hem. The doors rattled, hinges groaning as a new figure pushed through. A man, his coat torn, clutching a metal box, its surface rusted, scratched. He stumbled forward, rain streaming down his face, his voice hoarse. "I found this in Rigg's trailer." "It's his!" Medals, citations, all of it. The crowd gasped, cameras swiveled, and the judge's gavel slipped from her hand, clattering to the desk as the box hit the floor with a hollow thud. The rusted metal box struck the courtroom floor with a hollow thud, its lid springing open, spilling medals and yellowed papers across the rain-slicked tile. The man who carried it, coat torn and soaked, staggered forward, his boots slipping, rain streaming down his weathered face. "This is Rigg's," he rasped, pointing to the scattered contents, bronze stars, purple hearts, citations creased and faded. Daniel Rigg sat at the defense table, cuffs glinting under the chandelier's faltering light, his boots still, eyes locked on the metals, his plain shirt damp, clinging to his frame. Outside, the storm thundered, rain hammering the windows, news vans' strobes flashing red and blue through jagged streaks of water. The crowd surged closer, their chants, "Justice for Rigg," shaking the walls, fists pounding the doors. Deputies braced the entrance, their boots braced against the tile, radios crackling with urgent voices. "Crowd's pushing! Hold the line!" The judge stood, her robes billowing, gavel slipping from her hand, its clatter lost in the chaos. "Identify yourself," she demanded, her voice cutting through the din. The man straightened, his hand gripping the box's edge. "Jameson Reed, Your Honor. I live near Rigg's trailer. Found this buried in his yard." Cameras swiveled, their lenses whirring, capturing the metals glinting in the flickering light. Sergeant Major Hale, in his wheelchair, rolled forward, his metals clinking, scar stark under the fluorescence. "Those are his," Hale said, voice raw, pointing to a bronze star pinned to a faded ribbon. "He never wore them." The veterans along the back wall nodded, dog tags swaying, their eyes fierce. General Wyatt stood beside Hale, his 4 stars gleaming, his boots rooted, his gaze on Rigg. Rigg's cuffs clinked as his hands twitched, his fingers curling slightly, then relaxing. His eyes shifted from the metals to Reed, then to the letter on the clerk's desk, its ink-smudged words still unread. The prosecutor, suit crumpled, stepped forward, his voice shrill. "Your Honor, this is inadmissible. Unverified, no chain of custody." The public defender rose, her pen shaking. "We request immediate review of these items as evidence." The judge's glasses slipped, her hand steadying them. "Clerk, collect the contents." "Court will review." The clerk scrambled, her blazer flapping, gathering metals and papers, her hands trembling as a citation slipped, fluttering to the floor. It read, "Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Rigg, Fallujah, 1994, Distinguished Service." A reporter gasped, her phone raised, streaming live, whispering, "This is history." The crowd's roar outside swelled, their fists hammering news vans, headlights slicing through the rain. A deputy's radio buzzed. "Crowd's at 100, barricades failing." The judge's gavel slammed, its crack barely audible. "Order! Recess extended, 1 hour!" Her voice strained, her eyes flicking to Rigg, then the box, then the jury who hovered near their box, faces taut. A juror in a cardigan clutched her notepad, her glasses fogging, while a man with a buzz cut stared at the metals, his pen forgotten. The bailiff moved to Rigg, keys jangling, but Wyatt stepped in front, his hand raised. "He stays." The bailiff nodded, stepping back. Rigg sat, his cuffs clinking, his boots unmoving, water dripping from his hem, pooling beneath his chair. His eyes lifted to the veterans, Hale, Reese, others, their fists still raised, dog tags glinting. Margaret Cole, the neighbor, sat in the gallery, her raincoat dripping, her hands clasped, the letter's weight lingering in her posture. Reed, the man with the box, sank to a pew, his coat dripping, his eyes on Rigg, then the floor. The chandelier buzzed, plunging the room into shadow, then flaring bright, casting jagged patterns across Rigg's face. The veterans formed a half circle behind him, their boots rooted, their shadows merging with his. The prosecutor gathered his papers, his hands shaking, muttering, "This changes nothing." The public defender scribbled furiously, her laptop glowing, her eyes darting to Rigg, then the clerk's folder, where the letter and medals now lay. Hale rolled closer, his wheelchair creaking, his voice booming. "You see it now," he said to the jury, pointing to the box. "That's who he is. Not your charges, not your cuffs." He tapped his scar, his hand steady. "This is what happens without him." The jury stirred, a woman wiping her glasses, another nodding slowly. Outside, lightning flashed, thunder shaking the floor, rain streaking the windows like veins. The judge stood, her robes swishing, and exited through a side door, her footsteps fading. The crowd's chants pierced the walls, their voices raw, relentless. A news van's horn blared, answered by a roar, the doors rattling, hinges groaning. The bailiff barred the entrance, his radio crackling. But the veterans didn't move, their eyes locked on Rigg. Wyatt leaned toward him, his whisper inaudible, his hand brushing Rigg's shoulder. Rigg's eyes flicked to the metals, then the doors, where shadows pressed against the frosted glass. More figures arriving, their silhouettes sharp against the strobing lights. His cuffs shifted, a soft clink, his hands resting on the table, fingers still. The clerk clutched the folder, her hands trembling, the bronze star visible through the plastic sleeve. A reporter typed, her screen glowing, "Case collapsing, hero revealed." The doors flew open, a gust of wind sweeping in, carrying a tattered flag, stars and stripes, frayed, rain-soaked. A veteran in a wheelchair, medals pinned to his chest, held it high, his voice thundering, "For Rigg!" The crowd erupted, fists raised, cameras flashing, as the flag unfurled, its edges catching the chandelier's light, casting a shadow over Rigg's cuffs, his boots, his silence, as the judge's side door creaked open, her silhouette frozen in the frame.